It was supposed to be a quick stop on a long road trip. I'd been driving for hours, the road stretching on, with nothing but the hum of the tires to keep me company. I was tired, grumpy, and just wanted to sleep for a few hours before getting back on the road. So I pulled off the highway at this small, run-down motel. Nothing fancy, but it'd do. I checked in, got my key, and the receptionist told me room 108 right next to 107. The place didn't look like much, but I wasn't looking for luxury. I needed a bed, not a suite. I dragged my suitcase down the narrow hallway, and as I passed room 107, I noticed the door was slightly open. Not wide enough to see inside, but just enough that it caught my attention. I thought it was a little odd, but I figured maybe someone was just unpacking or airing out the room. I didn't think much of it, just kept walking to my own room. When I opened the door to 108, I threw my bag on the bed and collapsed. My body felt like lead, and I didn't even bother with the TV. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling for a while, trying to shake off the exhaustion. After a few minutes, I heard a voice from the room next door, through the thin walls. At first I couldn't make out what was being said, but the voice was low and steady. I thought it was just the sound of someone talking on the phone. Then it stopped. A few seconds later I heard the door to room 107 open, and the guy, probably in his mid-40s, came out and stood in the hallway for a moment. I figured I'd give him a casual nod if we crossed paths, but instead he walked in the opposite direction, not even looking my way. I thought it was a little odd, but nothing really alarming. I mean, people are strange, right? After a few hours I started feeling the sleepiness take over. I turned off the lights and went to bed. The next morning I woke up early and went to grab coffee from the lobby. It was still pretty quiet, so I figured I'd check out quick and get back on the road. As I passed room 107, I noticed the door was wide open again. I could see that the bed was perfectly made, nothing out of place. In fact, the room looked like no one had even stayed there at all. I thought maybe the guy checked out early, but I didn't remember hearing him leave. He had seemed like he was just there for a night, but it didn't make sense. It was like he vanished. I didn't think much of it, though. I just figured I was being paranoid from the long drive. So I went up to the front desk to check out, and I casually asked the receptionist, "Hey, did the guy in 107 leave already?" The receptionist blinked at me and gave me a confused look. "Room 107?" she asked. "No one's been in that room for days." I laughed. "Really? Because I saw someone in there last night talking to himself or something." She shook her head. "No, sir. No one checked in there. It's been empty for a while now." I didn't know what to say. I thought she was just mistaken, but I swear I had seen someone in there. I grabbed my bags and headed out to the car, trying to shake off the weird feeling. But as I was pulling out of the lot, something in my rear-view mirror caught my eye. I wasn't even thinking about it, but when I glanced back, I froze. There, in the window of room 107, I saw the man standing, staring out at me. His face was blank, almost lifeless, and in his hand was the same paperback book he had been reading the night before. I swear, I felt my stomach drop. I don't know what it was, but it didn't feel right. I wasn't sure if I was seeing things, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with that room. I didn't stop to ask any more questions. I just floored it and got out of there. I don't know what happened, but I'm telling you, that motel was the strangest place I've ever been. I don't know why I decided to stop at that motel. I was driving late into the night, heading down a lonely stretch of highway, and I'd been awake for almost 20 hours straight. There were no other motels around for miles, and I was getting desperate. I had no choice but to pull in. The place wasn't great, old, run down. the kind of place you'd expect to find in a small town, far off the main road. The neon sign outside barely flickered, and the office was dimly lit. The woman at the front desk barely looked up when I walked in, just gave me a key with a scribbled number on it, room 14. I didn't think much of it. I was just too tired to care. I grabbed my bag, went to my room, and shut the door behind me. The room was what I expected. A single bed, a small TV, and some old ugly curtains. Nothing fancy, but it was enough for the night. I locked the door behind me, pulled the curtains shut, and threw myself onto the bed. I didn't even bother with the TV, I just wanted sleep. But then, around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something strange. It was faint at first, like a low thud coming from below me. It sounded like someone was knocking on the floor. I ignored it at first, probably just the old building creaking. But then the noise got louder. It sounded more like banging now, something heavy being slammed against the walls. I sat up in bed, listening closely. It was coming from the floor beneath me. I got up and looked around. The room was completely quiet now, but that noise, it didn't stop. It was like muffled screaming, then banging again, like something or someone was trapped down there. I thought about calling the front desk, but what would I even say? Hey, I think there's someone locked in your basement. I didn't want to sound crazy, so I tried to shake it off and went back to bed. But the noise didn't stop. It continued for the next hour, maybe more. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my jacket, and left my room. The hall was completely empty, no signs of life. I stood there for a moment, listening. The noise was still there. Faint, but persistent. I made my way down the hallway to the back of the motel. At the end of the corridor, there was a door marked Employees Only. The door looked old, like it hadn't been used in years. But the noise, it was coming from behind that door. I hesitated for a moment. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, but the curiosity was eating at me. I tried the handle. It was locked, of course. I stepped back and listened again. There were muffled voices now, like someone was whispering behind the door. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded urgent, desperate. I walked back to my room and thought about what to do. I could just leave, but something was off. I felt like I needed to know what was happening. I went back to the front desk, hoping to ask the receptionist about the door. She was still there, sitting behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. "Hey," I said, my voice shaking just a little. "What's behind the door in the hallway?" "The one that says, Employees Only." She looked up at me like I was crazy. "Oh, that old thing? It's just storage," she said, dismissing me with a wave. "Nothing interesting." But I knew it wasn't just storage. The noises I'd heard didn't sound like storage. They sounded like someone in trouble. I decided to take a chance. I waited until I saw the receptionist disappear into the back office. I walked to the door and checked again. It was still locked, but there was a small window at eye level. I pressed my face against the glass and peered inside. What I saw made my heart drop. There were cages in there. Small, metal cages, stacked in rows. And inside the cages, people who were tied up, their faces pale, some of them looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. Others were motionless, their bodies limp. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like something out of a nightmare. I stepped back, my pulse racing. I didn't know what was going on, but it was clear that something horrible was happening behind that door. I couldn't stay there anymore. I didn't even think about the key, about checking out properly. I grabbed my stuff and ran out of that motel as fast as I could. Before I left, I decided to peek around the back of the motel to see if I could spot anything that could explain the noise. That's when I saw it. an old rusted metal door leading to what looked like a storage shed. But there was no way in hell I was going near that thing. It was late when I pulled into the small motel off the highway. I had been driving for hours, and the night was already settling in. My eyes were burning from exhaustion, and I just wanted a place to sleep. The neon sign above the office flickered, and the parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars scattered here and there. I walked inside to the office and rang the bell. After a couple of seconds, a man in his 40s appeared from the back, wearing a worn-out t-shirt and sweatpants. His eyes were heavy, like he had just woken up. But he greeted me with a half-hearted smile. "Late night drive?" he asked, wiping his hands on his pants. "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound polite. "I've been on the road for a while, just need a place to crash." He nodded, pulling out a small binder with keys hanging from it. "Room 12, he said, handing me a brass key. "You're lucky. We don't get too many people stopping by this time of night." I thanked him and took the key, making my way to the room. The parking lot felt strangely silent, and the air smelled of old, musty carpets and stale smoke. It was your typical run-down motel. Nothing fancy, but it'd do for the night. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was dim, the only light coming from a flickering lamp near the bed. The TV was on, but the screen was just static. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down, feeling the weight of the road settle in my bones. I needed to rest, but something about the place felt off. It wasn't the condition of the room, though. It was the stillness, like the building itself was holding its breath. I turned off the TV and laid back, hoping sleep would come quickly, but it didn't. Instead, I kept hearing faint noises from the hallway. It sounded like soft footsteps, like someone was walking up and down. I figured it was just the walls being thin, or the old structure settling, but it was annoying. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. About 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I froze, unsure whether I had heard it right. Another knock, louder this time. I opened the door cautiously, and there stood the man from the office, looking a bit disheveled. "Hey, there's been a mix-up with the room. You were given the wrong key. This room's already occupied," he said, his voice a little shaky. "Are you serious?" I asked, not really in the mood for games. "I've been on the road for hours. I just want to sleep." The man's eyes flickered nervously. "I'm sorry, man, but you're going to have to go to a different room. It's just policy." I hesitated. What's going on here? You're telling me I've been given a room that's occupied?" He nodded, backing away slightly. "Yeah, but it's fine. Just go to room 14. The key's the same. I'll take care of everything. Just go to sleep." Something felt off, but I was too tired to argue. I grabbed my bag, grabbed the new key, and went down the hallway. As I passed by room 12, I noticed the door was cracked open just a bit. There was a faint light inside. I paused for a moment, staring at the door. But then I heard the man's voice calling from behind, urging me to hurry up, so I just shook it off and went to room 14. When I opened the door to room 14, the first thing that hit me was the smell of stale food and cigarettes. The room looked exactly like the one I had just left, but there was something strange about the bed. It was neatly made, but there was a faint indentation in the middle, like someone had just gotten up. I set my things down and went to the bathroom. When I came back, I found that the light outside my door was flickering on and off, casting strange shadows in the hallway. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I felt like I needed to leave. I grabbed my phone to call the office, but before I could dial, there was a loud banging on the door. I jumped up, heart racing, and swung it open. Standing there was a man, tall, scruffy looking, with wild, unkempt hair and a jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. His eyes were wide, and his breathing was heavy. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snapped, stepping forward aggressively. I backed away instinctively. "What are you talking about? I was given this room." His face twisted in confusion, then anger. "No, you weren't. I'm not supposed to have anyone in here. The motel sends strangers to my room every damn time. Every damn time." His voice cracked with frustration. I didn't know what to say. It felt like I had stepped into some kind of nightmare and I wasn't sure how to wake up. He didn't give me a chance to respond. He slammed the door in my face, muttering under his breath. I stood there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. My heart was still pounding in my chest. Was he crazy, or was there something deeper going on here? I couldn't understand it, but I knew I had to get out. Just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard footsteps behind me. Soft but quick, like someone was running down the hallway. I turned around and saw a woman in the distance, walking briskly toward me. She had short black hair, and her face was so pale, it almost looked like she hadn't seen the sun in years. She was holding a key in her hand. She stopped in front of me, looking just as confused as I felt. I'm sorry," she said in a whisper. "I was told this was my room, but there's someone in there." I swallowed hard. "Wait, you're saying?" Before I could say anything else, I heard the man's voice in the distance calling out, "Get away from her. Stay out of my room." I didn't know what was happening, but I didn't want to find out. I turned and bolted back to the office, praying I'd get a straight answer. But when I told the receptionist what had happened, he didn't seem surprised. He just handed me the key to another room. As I walked back to my car, I saw the woman and the man talking in the hallway, but I couldn't make out their words. All I know is that I wasn't the first person this had happened to, and I sure as hell wouldn't be the last. "What do you think?"